What if the truth Prince William spent his entire life running from, burying, ignoring, refusing to even consider, was written in his own blood? And what if that truth wasn't just painful or inconvenient, but dangerous enough that Princess Diana believed it could get her killed? Think about that for a moment. Imagine learning that everything you were raised to believe about your identity, your future, your family, your destiny, collapses in a single instant. Now imagine that the person who tried to warn you about it, the only person who truly loved you without agenda, died in circumstances so suspicious that even today, decades later, millions still refuse to believe the official explanation. And now imagine that a simple DNA test, one William never wanted to take, not only confirmed what Diana feared, but exposed something the palace had spent years, maybe decades, desperately trying to hide. Something King Charles allegedly knew. Something he didn't want William to ever uncover. Something Diana called her final secret. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's be honest, we've all seen countless headlines about royal scandals, affairs, tensions, inheritances, favoritism, power games, and quiet family feuds whispered through palace corridors. But this story, this one, is different. It isn't just about who said what, or who did what, or who leaked which document. This is about a deeper, older, more dangerous truth. A truth that starts not with Meghan, not with Harry, not with William's position as future king, and not even with Diana's tragic death, but with something more primal and fundamental: lineage, blood, heritage, identity, secrets that can only be confirmed through science. Scientific evidence powerful enough to challenge narratives protected by institutions older than most modern nations. And here's the most unsettling part. Diana predicted all of it. She said she feared for her life. She said she was being watched. She said accidents could be arranged. She said she was holding information that could shake the monarchy. But what kind of information? What could possibly push the House of Windsor, the world's most media-protected, tightly controlled, politically entangled royal family, to such extremes? Money? Affairs? Embarrassment? Public image? No. Those things embarrass the monarchy, yes, but they don't destroy it. Only one kind of secret could do that, something that strikes at the heart of the monarchy's power, legitimacy. And that brings us to the moment that shook William to the core. The moment he opened a sealed envelope written in his mother's unmistakable handwriting. The moment he realized why she'd been frightened, why she'd been crying, why she'd been recording secret tapes, why she warned friends to keep certain letters hidden, why she left breadcrumbs only he would understand, why she whispered a cryptic message to him decades ago that he didn't grasp until now. Because the truth wasn't meant for the public. It wasn't meant for Charles. It wasn't even meant for Harry. It was meant for William and William alone. A message that would only make sense once he was old enough, strong enough, and emotionally prepared to face it. But here's the twist most people never saw coming. This isn't a story about a mother desperately trying to destroy the monarchy. This is a story about a mother desperately trying to protect her son from being destroyed by the monarchy. There's a difference. A big one. And everything in Diana's life, her decisions, her fears, her instincts, points to a single conclusion. She knew something enormous, something that threatened the continuity of the crown. Something that made powerful people nervous. Something that made certain conversations happen behind closed doors. And something that made Charles, allegedly, more desperate and more volatile than ever. Before we dive into the details of the DNA test, let's slow down and examine the emotional landscape William lived in. Imagine being raised by two parents locked in an emotional war. One parent warm, compassionate, emotionally open, fighting to give her sons a normal life. The other parent distant, cold, angry, frustrated, trapped by protocol, shackled to an image, battling his own resentments. As William grew older, he noticed the cracks, the shouting behind closed doors, the tension at dinners, the arguments whispered down corridors, the tears, the late-night conversations Diana had on the phone, the way she would hug him a little too tightly, as if afraid of losing him. These weren't just small signs of a marriage collapsing. They were warnings. And despite being a child, William sensed it. He didn't understand why, but he felt it. He absorbed it. It shaped him. And now, decades later, All those small moments, the strange comments from Diana, the unusual instructions she left behind, the sudden sorrow in her eyes, suddenly made sense. Because when he finally saw the results of the test, when he finally connected the dots, he realized something chilling. His mother had been trying to prepare him, not for a scandal, not for a tabloid storm, but for a truth that could change the monarchy forever. Now let's ask the question no one dares to speak aloud. What kind of DNA result could bring a grown man, a future king, to tears? What kind of revelation could make the entire palace panic the moment they found out he was getting tested? Remember, this wasn't a public announcement. William took the test in total secrecy, under a fake name, in a private lab. Why? Because he didn't trust anyone, not advisors, not senior staff, not royal physicians, not family friends, and especially not anyone whose job depended on keeping the monarchy intact at any cost. And yet someone found out. Someone leaked the information up the chain. Someone alerted Charles. And that triggered what insiders described as the most tense 48 hours inside the palace since the death of Queen Elizabeth. Why would a simple DNA test cause that kind of panic? Why would Charles allegedly snap? He cannot know. Why would senior aides hold emergency meetings? Why would security protocols suddenly change? Why would William's quiet, private act cause a full-blown crisis among people who never panic? Because they feared the result. They feared what it could confirm. They feared what William might do with the information. And they feared something even more disturbing, that Diana had already predicted this moment. Because if Diana had left behind letters, tapes, or instructions pointing to something that could be verified scientifically, there was no stopping the truth. Now think about the timing. William didn't choose to do this randomly. Something pushed him to it. Something he found. Something he read. Something he heard. Something that reopened old wounds and raised new suspicions. Something that made him ask himself, what if she was right? And once he allowed that question into his mind, once he let that doubt slip through the cracks, the floodgates opened. Every strange memory rushed back. Every warning Diana gave echoed louder. Every unanswered question became sharper. And William, for the first time in decades, stopped running from the past and turned to face it head-on. This story matters not because it's sensational or scandalous, but because it's rooted in a universal human fear, the fear of discovering that your identity is not what you believed it to be, that your past is not what you were told, that your future is built on a foundation of silence, secrets, and lies. And William, a man raised from birth to be king, suddenly found himself confronting a truth that could challenge everything he had ever known about who he was. This story matters because Diana's fears weren't isolated emotional outbursts. They were warnings. And the fact that those warnings now intersect directly with scientifically verified results makes this more than a conspiracy theory. It makes it a puzzle with missing pieces finally snapping into place. This story matters because the monarchy itself is at an inflection point. Public trust is shifting. Generational loyalty is fading. Scandals are piling up. And the last thing the palace needs is a revelation that rewrites royal history, royal lineage, and royal legitimacy all at once. But above all, this story matters because of one thing: the emotional weight carried by a son who never got to say goodbye to his mother properly. A son who watched her suffer. A son who saw her ridiculed, isolated, and dismissed. A son who now realizes that she spent her final years trying to protect him from a truth that could break him. So as we begin this journey, this deep dive into Diana's final secret, the palace's reaction, and the DNA test that shook the future king, remember this: every step of this story is connected. Every chapter answers a question raised earlier. Every revelation is tied to something Diana hinted at decades ago. And every emotional moment brings us closer to understanding why William broke down when he saw those results. Because what came next, what the DNA test actually revealed, what Diana knew long before anyone else, and what the palace tried to bury, would change everything, and no one, absolutely no one, saw it coming. What if Diana's fear wasn't just fear, but foresight? What if the words she whispered in private, words dismissed as paranoia, dramatics, emotional instability, were actually the clearest warning signs she ever gave? And what if the people closest to her, including Prince William, realized far too late that Diana wasn't imagining danger, she was living in it? This is where the story truly begins. Not with a DNA test, not with William's breakdown, and not with sealed envelopes or hidden tapes, but with a frightened woman staring at an institution powerful enough to erase truths, rewrite narratives, and bury secrets. Because before William ever touched a DNA kit, before he ever questioned his lineage, before he ever confronted King Charles, he had to confront something far more haunting. The memory of a mother who repeatedly said, "They're going to do it to me." Think about that phrase for a moment. Not "I'm afraid." Not "I feel unsafe." Not "something bad might happen." But "they're going to do it to me." Direct, clear, personal, final. Who was they? What was it? And why was Diana so certain? Most people have heard snippets of her fears, interview fragments, rumors, diary entries. But few understand how deep those fears ran or how many people she confided in. What if I told you Diana didn't say it once, but dozens of times? To friends, to bodyguards, to journalists she trusted, to staff members who noticed strange activity around her. And, most heartbreaking of all, to her own son. William was young, but not oblivious. Children see more than adults realize. And Diana, in her vulnerability, sometimes forgot to shield him from the emotional storms raging around her. He heard her cry in the bathroom. He heard the hushed phone calls. He heard the arguments with Charles echoing down the hall. He saw her pace with restless anxiety when unmarked cars lingered too long outside Kensington Palace. He sensed her fear every time she left the house and looked over her shoulder. Even if he didn't understand the full picture, he knew something wasn't right. But here's the twist. Diana wasn't naturally paranoid. She wasn't a dramatic, unstable, exaggerated version of herself like some tabloids painted her. She was intuitive, observational, emotionally intelligent. She could read people with frightening accuracy. And when she felt she was in danger, it wasn't because of fantasy. It was because patterns had changed around her in ways she couldn't ignore. Staff shifts that didn't make sense. Security protocols altered without warning. People suddenly becoming cold. Friends cutting her off. Conversations stopping when she walked into the room. Briefings she was excluded from. Rumors of affairs used to smear her reputation. And a quiet, but unmistakable shift in the palace's tolerance for her independence. This was the era when Diana was breaking free. She had separated from Charles. She was becoming her own global icon. She didn't need the crown to shine. She was brighter than the institution itself. And that terrified people. The monarchy thrives on hierarchy, control, narrative management. But Diana? She couldn't be controlled. She broke rules. She spoke from the heart. She hugged patients with AIDS when society was still afraid to touch them. She confronted landmine policy on the world stage. She charmed presidents, celebrities, powerful leaders. She was a humanitarian force unmatched in her generation. And power hates competition. Now, let's look at one of the most chilling moments in Diana's timeline. The moment she recorded a tape describing her fears, naming names, and predicting her own death. Why would a young, healthy woman, a mother of 2 beloved boys, record something like that unless she believed the threat was real? She wasn't imagining danger. She felt hunted. She told close friends she feared a staged accident. She told her lawyers she believed they were planning something involving cars, brakes, or unusual technical failures. She even described potential scenarios, details that eerily overlapped with how she eventually died. But here's where the emotional punch hits hardest. Diana tried to warn William. Not directly. She would never frighten him deliberately, but she gave him breadcrumbs. Subtle comments. Hints. Strange warnings about trust. Quiet instructions about people to avoid. Oddly specific advice for the future. And once, in a moment of aching vulnerability, she whispered something to him. Something he didn't understand as a child but remembered as an adult. Something that would echo in his memory decades later when he opened the envelope she left behind. Something that would hit him even harder when he saw the DNA results. That one sentence, locked away in his mind, suddenly made sense only after the truth came out. But let's pull the camera back. Diana wasn't a naive princess wandering through palace halls in fear. She was observant, calculating, aware of power dynamics, and absolutely certain she was being silenced slowly. When she confided in friends like Simone Simmons, she didn't speak in vague terms. She named individuals. She described motives. She explained the stakes. She said she had information that could bring down the monarchy. And while some people assumed she meant personal scandals or affairs, those who listened closely realized she was referring to something deeper. Diana wasn't simply fighting Charles. She was fighting the system that protected him. And William, even as a boy, saw the cracks forming. He saw the way his parents looked at each other. He saw his mother's fear when Charles became angry. He saw how tense the atmosphere became whenever Diana mentioned certain people or topics. He even saw how palace staff acted differently around her. Some sympathetic, some cold, some dismissive, some quietly terrified of being associated with her. This environment shaped William in ways he couldn't articulate. Children understand tone before they understand words. And the tone inside Kensington Palace was shifting from sadness to danger, from marital conflict to something darker. Something that lingered in the air like static. Something that made Diana lock her doors at night. Something that made her avoid certain corridors. Something that made her tell her butler, "I don't think I'm going to survive." And William? He internalized all of it. He became protective. He became watchful. He became afraid. At school, he would ask if anyone had called. He would check on his mother constantly. He learned emotional maturity far earlier than any child should. And when Diana would finally catch his eye after crying or worrying or whispering about danger, she would smile and reassure him, trying to hide her fear. But children always know when a parent is pretending. Now here's the irony that makes this story sting. The very institution Diana feared would harm her is the same institution William was destined to lead. And as he grew older, he began to understand the complexity of that. The monarchy provided him with structure, privilege, and identity. But it also suffocated his mother, isolated her, controlled her, and, in her eyes, endangered her. That contradiction lived inside William for years. He loved the crown, and he resented it. He respected tradition, and he distrusted its protectors. He wanted to uphold the monarchy, and yet he feared it might hold truths capable of destroying him. This emotional tug-of-war is what eventually pushed him to the breaking point decades later. Long after Diana's death, long after the world moved on, long after he learned to bury old wounds. Because pain like that doesn't disappear. It waits, quietly, patiently, until something triggers it again. And something did. Something William found. Something that forced him to relive the fear he felt as a child. Something that made Diana's warnings roar back to life. Something that made him question not only her death, but her life, her motives, her secrets. And when he connected that discovery to the memory of her whispering, "They're going to do it to me," everything changed. So what exactly did Diana know? What final secret drove her to fear for her life? What truth made her warn friends, record tapes, write letters, and protect evidence? What could possibly make Charles panic decades later when William decided to take a DNA test? The answer begins with one moment, one conversation. One night, Diana confided in someone she trusted. Someone who would later describe the fear in her eyes as cold and certain. Someone who understood she wasn't asking for comfort. She was asking for help, because she believed she was running out of time. And that person, years after Diana's death, would reveal something shocking. Diana didn't just fear danger. She believed someone inside the palace had a plan to silence her, a plan she tried desperately to escape, a plan that terrified her enough to leave behind evidence for the son she knew would one day seek the truth. And what William discovered years later, what triggered the DNA test, was tied directly to that confession. Because Diana didn't just leave behind emotional warnings. She left something physical, something verifiable, something the palace never expected him to find. The kind of secret that makes a grown prince collapse in tears. The kind of secret a DNA test can confirm. The kind of secret that ties her fear to her death, to the monarchy's darkest chapter. But the real shock? This wasn't the only secret Diana kept. And the one she buried deepest, the one she whispered about only once, would change William's life forever. What if the one sentence William remembered from his childhood, the sentence he never understood, the one he brushed off, the one he told himself was nothing, was actually the single biggest clue Diana ever gave him? What if that small, fleeting moment, barely a whisper, became the key that unlocked the very truth the palace fought desperately to bury? And what if the reason he remembered it, even decades later, even after all the chaos, even after building a new life with Catherine, even after becoming a father himself, wasn't an accident at all, but because Diana intended for him to remember it. That's the question we have to start with. Because Chapter 2 isn't just about a secret. It's about the moment a mother tried to protect her son from something she feared the monarchy would one day use to destroy him. Picture William as a boy. Soft-spoken, emotionally intelligent, far more mature than his age ever required. He adored his mother. He watched over her as much as she watched over him. He picked up on her moods, noticed her anxieties, sensed her sadness even when she forced a smile. He was her anchor, her safe space, her reason to stay strong. And because of that, Diana chose William, not Harry, not a friend, not a staff member, to hear her most delicate warning. Not the dramatic ones, not the fear-filled ones, not the ones about being watched or silenced. This one was different, quieter, more intimate, more cryptic, and unlike anything else she ever said. It happened on a night that, by all outward appearance, looked ordinary. But as adults, we know something children don't. The most important moments in life rarely announce themselves. They slide in quietly. They happen between breaths. They happen when the world isn't watching. And that's exactly how this moment entered William's memory, softly, unexpectedly, but permanently. It was late, too late for a little boy to be awake, but William couldn't sleep. The arguing earlier between Charles and Diana had shaken him. He heard muffled voices through the thick palace walls, heard the tension, felt the tremor in the air that always appeared before something painful happened. So he padded quietly to his mother's room, as he sometimes did when the world felt too heavy. He expected to see her brushing her hair or writing letters. But she was sitting on her bed, back slightly hunched, staring at a single piece of paper as if it were a ghost. When she noticed him, she jumped slightly, an instinctive reaction, like someone who had been caught doing something forbidden. William, young but perceptive, knew instantly that whatever she was looking at was something he wasn't supposed to see. But instead of hiding it, instead of folding it away, instead of pretending everything was normal, she slowly pat the empty space beside her and said, "Come here, darling. Mummy's just thinking." Thinking. That word would come to haunt him later. She put the paper down carefully, almost ceremonially, like it was fragile or dangerous or both. Then she took his hand, squeezed it, and looked at him with eyes so filled with emotion he couldn't quite understand it. Adults forget how emotionally aware children are. They may not grasp the words, but they feel the weight behind them. And William felt something heavy that night. Something sad, something fearful, something unspoken. And that's when she told him the sentence he'd never forget. She leaned down, brushed his hair back, and whispered, "One day, you'll learn something about our family. When that day comes, remember what kind of man you are. Not, remember who you are. Not, remember where you came from. Not, remember your duty. But remember what kind of man you are." A strangely specific, strangely emotional, strangely foreboding message. At the time, William didn't understand. How could he? He was a boy, not yet old enough to understand politics, lineage, generational trauma, or the weight of secrets. But he felt the seriousness in her voice. He felt the urgency. He felt the sadness. And when he asked her what she meant, she paused. A long pause. The kind of silence that fills a room like fog. Then she simply said, "Just promise me you'll be strong when the truth comes." The truth. Another word he wouldn't fully grasp until adulthood. William promised. Because children promise anything their mothers ask when they see tears forming in their eyes. He nodded, hugged her, felt the tremble in her breath. And that moment, simple, gentle, confusing, stamped itself into his memory forever. But here's where the real emotional twist lies. Diana acted like she had said too much, like she'd broken a rule, like she'd crossed a line she wasn't supposed to cross. She quickly changed the subject, talked about school, made a joke, kissed his forehead, tucked him in. But William remembered the look she had when she first whispered that sentence. A look of heartbreak mixed with hope. A look of fear mixed with determination. A look he didn't understand but never forgot. As he grew older, Diana's sentence drifted to the back of his mind, buried under schoolwork, teenage years, royal duties, romances, and eventually fatherhood. Life moved on. He matured. He focused on Catherine, on his children, on his role as future king. And yet, Every now and then, in moments of anxiety, distress, or reflection, that sentence would rise from the depths of his memory like a shadow resurfacing. One day, you'll learn something about our family. But William assumed she meant the divorce, or Charles's affairs, or media pressure, or royal duties, or political turmoil. He thought she meant emotional truth, not literal, scientific truth. It wasn't until he received the envelope, Diana's sealed message, written decades earlier, that the sentence came roaring back with terrifying clarity. Because inside that envelope wasn't gossip, speculation, or personal confession. It was instruction and evidence. Evidence that pointed to something much darker than marital conflict. Evidence Diana had gathered quietly. Evidence she feared the palace would destroy if they ever found it. Evidence she wanted William to see, but only when he was old enough to understand. Evidence that linked directly to the one thing no one in the monarchy could spin, hide, or manipulate: DNA. But here's the twist that reveals so much about Diana's motivations. She never told Harry. Not because she loved him less, but because she knew Harry wasn't meant to carry the burden. William was the heir. William was the future. William was the one the monarchy would value most, and therefore the one they would protect or manipulate the hardest. William was the one who needed to know. And Diana, sensing danger, fearing silencing, feeling watched, prepared him in the only way she knew how: through subtle, emotional coding. Through a message small enough to fit into a whisper, yet powerful enough to shape his entire future. Now, let's fast forward. Decades later, when William opened that envelope, when he saw his mother's handwriting, when he read the words she'd left behind, when he saw the documents she tucked inside, when he realized why she was so afraid, when he made the connection between the evidence and her whisper from childhood, the memory detonated in his mind like a bomb. That moment, long forgotten, suddenly snapped into perfect focus. And for the first time in his life, he realized that Diana hadn't been warning him about emotional pain. She had been warning him about biological truth. She had been warning him about lineage. She had been warning him about blood. Because the truth he was about to discover wasn't just shocking. It wasn't just painful. It wasn't just dangerous. It was the kind of truth that could unravel the monarchy. And Diana had known it all along. But the most haunting part? She wasn't the only one who knew. Someone else inside the palace knew exactly what she meant. Someone who had everything to lose if the truth ever came out. Someone who reacted violently when he learned William had taken the test. Someone who allegedly said, "He cannot know." And that someone was King Charles. But the reason Charles panicked isn't what people think. It wasn't the test itself. It wasn't the envelope. It wasn't the memory. It was because the person Diana shared the full secret with, the one person she trusted more than anyone else, was about to come forward. And William was about to meet them. What happens when a man born into absolute control suddenly realizes he can no longer control the one person who threatens his entire future? What happens when that person is not an enemy, not a rival politician, not a journalist, but his own wife? The mother of the heir to the throne, the woman adored globally, the woman he underestimated until it was far too late? And what happens when that woman begins asking the kinds of questions you never want asked inside a monarchy built on silence? To understand the DNA test that shattered Prince William, we must first understand the escalating tension that turned King Charles from a frustrated husband into a man allegedly desperate to protect a secret that could ruin him. This chapter isn't just about anger, it's about fear. Fear that grows, festers, and eventually explodes. So let's go back to the early 1990s, when Diana was transforming from a princess into a global humanitarian force. The world saw her as the people's princess, but inside the palace, her rising independence was viewed as something very different: dangerous. Why? Because she wasn't just stepping out of Charles's shadow, she was eclipsing him entirely. Everywhere she went, cameras followed. Crowds chanted her name. International leaders requested meetings with her personally, not the royal institution. She wasn't just popular, she was unstoppable. And Charles hated it. Not in the petty, jealous way tabloids like to portray him, but in a far more existential sense. He saw Diana's growing influence as a direct threat to the stability of the monarchy and to his own legitimacy. Every charity she championed overshadowed his initiatives. Every interview she gave undermined carefully crafted royal narratives. Every tear she shed in public revealed the cracks behind the palace walls. She wasn't just a wife making waves. She was a truth-teller in a system built on secrecy. And for a man raised from birth to guard the institution at all costs, that made her unpredictable, unmanageable, dangerous. The breaking point came when Diana decided she didn't need permission to live her life anymore. She began choosing her own causes, her own friends, her own schedule. She stopped attending certain royal functions. She refused to play the silent, obedient role expected of her. And perhaps most importantly, she started communicating with journalists, not recklessly, but strategically. She knew how to plant seeds. She knew how to direct narratives without ever saying something outright. She understood how to use the press to protect herself. But that's exactly what made the palace panic. Because Diana was no longer under their control. And if someone is no longer under your control, they become a threat, especially if they're holding a secret capable of upending the royal lineage. Charles's reaction to this shift was not subtle. Sources from that time describe him as irritable, short-tempered, dismissive, sometimes outright furious behind closed doors. He accused Diana of humiliating him. He accused her of manipulating public sympathy. He accused her of playing the victim. But beneath the anger, behind the sharp remarks and icy silences, there was something darker, something deeper. Fear. Fear that Diana knew more than she was supposed to. Fear that she might expose something he couldn't afford exposed. Fear that her independence meant she was no longer predictable. And nothing frightens power more than unpredictability. Let's zoom in on one critical moment, one that insiders have whispered about for years. It occurred after a major event where Diana, once again, commanded the world's attention. Her natural warmth overshadowed everyone, including Charles. When they returned to the palace, Charles was livid. Not jealous of applause, but angry about the symbolism. She was becoming bigger than the monarchy itself. Bigger than tradition. Bigger than him. He reportedly snapped, "You're going to ruin everything." What was everything? Public respect? The marriage? The institution? Or was it something much more personal? According to those present, Diana didn't back down. She told Charles, calmly but firmly, "The truth ruins nothing except lies." A sentence that cut deeper than Charles expected. Because in that moment, Diana wasn't talking about gossip or tabloids. She wasn't talking about Camilla or arguments or media narratives. She was talking about something else entirely, something Charles knew she had discovered or was close to discovering. And his reaction that night, his explosive anger, his pacing, his frantic conversations with advisors, revealed his panic. This wasn't marital tension. This was crisis management. Now let's examine why Diana's independence was becoming intolerable for Charles. She began spending more time with people outside the royal bubble, humanitarians, doctors, charity leaders, even political figures. She was learning things, hearing things, observing things. And in that process, she stumbled upon information that connected directly to the final secret she would one day reference in letters, tapes, and that sealed envelope William later received. Insiders say Diana started to ask questions about lineage, heritage, medical histories, discrepancies, timelines. She made notes. She wrote letters. She confided in friends. And worst of all, she began confronting Charles with things she had learned. And every time she did, Charles reacted with escalating fury. Why? Because she was getting too close to the one thing the monarchy cannot allow, genetic truth. One close friend later said Diana told her, "He gets more angry when I mention family than anything else." That statement speaks volumes. It wasn't affairs that enraged him most. Not public sympathy for Diana. Not her celebrity. Not her activism. It was when she touched the subject of lineage. Let that sink in. Diana wasn't trying to destroy Charles. She wasn't trying to expose him. She wasn't even trying to fight the monarchy. She was trying to protect her sons. But Charles saw her questions as threats. He saw her friendships as leaks. He saw her notes as evidence that needed to be stopped. And when she refused to back down, when she continued to speak, travel, mingle, question, the palace began treating her independence as a security risk. This wasn't about safety. This was about containment. William, of course, was too young to understand the nuances, but he wasn't too young to feel the tension. He saw his father's rage. He saw the way Charles slammed doors, the way he raised his voice, the way he walked out of rooms whenever Diana tried to discuss certain topics. William didn't understand the words, but he understood the fear, and that fear imprinted on him. Years later, when he opened the sealed envelope Diana left behind. Years later, when he discovered what she had been researching. Years later, when he saw the documents she kept hidden. Years later, when he realized how Charles reacted every time she asked questions. It all clicked. Charles wasn't angry because the marriage was falling apart. He was angry because Diana knew something she shouldn't have known. And when Diana began acting independently, without palace approval, without protocol, without royal filters, Charles allegedly became terrified she would reveal what she knew, that she would tell someone who could verify it, that she would leak something the palace couldn't control. This fear began to shape his every interaction with her. Advisors noticed, staff noticed, friends noticed, and Diana noticed most of all. She told one confidant, "He's frightened I'll say something. Not do something. Not cause trouble. Not embarrass him. But say something. A verbal truth. A revelation. A sentence. Why would words scare the future king? Unless those words concerned something only science could confirm. Unless those words involved a secret he desperately needed buried. Unless those words could unravel not just his marriage, but the monarchy's very foundation." The pressure grew. Tensions escalated. Diana became more vocal. Charles became more unstable. The palace became more secretive. And then something snapped. A moment that people close to the situation still talk about. A moment referenced carefully, whispered cautiously, never fully acknowledged. A night when Charles reportedly lost control after Diana confronted him with something she had discovered. Something she shouldn't have known. Something that touched the forbidden topic, bloodline. People who heard the argument said Charles's voice echoed through the walls. Rage mixed with fear. Not the anger of a husband, but the terror of a man whose entire future was suddenly vulnerable. A man who believed Diana posed the greatest threat to everything he had been groomed to become. And after that night, Diana's fears intensified. Her warnings grew sharper. Her letters became more urgent. Her notes more detailed. Her voice more troubled. She told multiple friends, "They want to shut me up." She said, "I know too much." She whispered, "I have to be careful." And finally, "They're going to do it to me. Not because of the divorce. Not because of the interviews. Not because of the media. But because she was holding a secret worth silencing." And decades later, when William learned what that secret was, when he took the test, when he saw the result, when he confronted the truth, he finally understood why Diana had been so afraid. But the most disturbing part? The secret didn't originate with Diana. It originated with Charles. And the night Diana confronted him with the information was the night everything changed. Because she wasn't just guessing. She had proof. And now, years later, the person who helped Diana obtain that proof was ready to step forward. William was about to meet them. What if the most important truth Diana ever spoke, her final secret, the one she never dared to write publicly, the one she feared would cost her life, was whispered not to William, not to her private secretary, not to her lawyer, but to a single trusted friend on a night the palace hoped history would forget? What if that night held the key to everything William would one day uncover? And what if the friend who received that confession carried it in silence for decades, terrified that speaking it aloud would put them in the same danger Diana believed she was in? This chapter takes us into the darkest, most intimate moment of Diana's life, the moment she realized she could no longer trust anyone inside the royal machine, except one person. To understand that night, we have to step into Diana's emotional state near the end of her marriage. By this point, she was isolated, monitored, doubted, gaslit, and depicted as unstable. But here's the contradiction. The more the palace tried to discredit her, the more Diana's intuition sharpened. She saw through people. She sensed danger. She recognized patterns. And she understood the power dynamics that were silently tightening around her. Her global fame made her unstoppable. Her independence made her unpredictable. And her truth made her dangerous. She knew she was holding something explosive, something she wasn't supposed to know. Something she hadn't gone looking for, but found anyway. Something that wasn't about affairs or personal drama, but about blood. And the moment she realized what she had stumbled into, everything changed. The tension around her became suffocating. Staff acted strange. Security routines shifted. Charles's temper sharpened. Doors closed a little faster when she approached. Conversations went silent when she entered rooms. Phone calls clicked with mysterious static. Her letters disappeared. Her diaries were tampered with. Her privacy evaporated. Diana felt it all. Which brings us to the night. Late, quiet, shadowed. The kind of night where emotions pour out because the world finally stops spinning long enough for fear to breathe. Diana met with a friend she trusted deeply. Not a member of staff, not someone in the royal machine, but someone outside the palace walls. Someone who understood her from before the fame. Someone who saw her as a human being rather than a symbol. Someone who had no stake in the monarchy, no allegiance to the crown, no reason to betray her. They met at a private residence, far from the eyes and ears Diana believed were tracking her every move. And the moment she stepped inside, the friend noticed something different. Diana wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't venting. She was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm people have when they've accepted something horrifying. The friend asked what was wrong. Diana didn't answer immediately. She walked into the living room, sat down, clasped her hands together, and stared at the floor for nearly a minute, silent, unmoving, as if building the courage to say something irreversible. Then she lifted her head and said, "If anything happens to me, remember this." The friend froze. Diana had said fearful things before, yes. She had hinted at danger. She had expressed distrust of her security, but she had never spoken with this level of finality. The friend asked, "Happens? What do you mean?" Diana answered with a sentence that sent chills through them both. "They're going to do it to me. Not maybe. Not I'm afraid. Not I feel unsafe. But they're going to do it to me." The friend's heart dropped. They asked who they were. Diana didn't name them. She didn't need to. The implication was clear. The palace. The machinery around it. The people with power. Then, slowly, she reached into her bag. Not a purse. Not a clutch. A bag she only carried when she needed privacy. Inside it was a stack of papers, notes, photographs, receipts, evidence. Evidence she believed proved something so catastrophic, so devastating, that the monarchy would never allow it to surface. She laid them out on the coffee table like a mosaic of danger. "These," she said, "are why they want me gone." The friend looked at the documents, confused, shocked, terrified. Some were photocopies. Some were handwritten. Some referenced doctors. Others referenced timelines, names, events. Some involved Charles directly. Others touched on matters the monarchy had buried for decades. And then Diana said the sentence that finally revealed what she had been carrying. "William will need to know the truth one day. He can't be blindsided. The truth. The truth. Always the truth." The friend asked, "Why William? Why not both boys?" Diana hesitated. Not because she didn't love Harry, but because she understood the hierarchy that had raised her, shaped her, and scarred her. She knew the heir would face pressures the spare never would. She knew the monarchy would protect William or manipulate him at all costs. She knew he would one day inherit the crown. And a truth this big, this dangerous, this explosive would crush him if revealed too soon. Then she whispered something the friend would never forget. "It's written in his blood. They can't hide it forever. Blood. Not headlines. Not rumors. Not scandals. But blood." The friend's pulse quickened. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't gossip. This was something only science could confirm or expose. The kind of truth that could alter royal succession, rewrite narratives, or cast shadows over the legitimacy of an entire institution. Then the friend realized something important. Diana wasn't just scared. She wasn't just emotional. She wasn't just venting. She was planning. She opened a sealed envelope. Yes, that envelope, and handed it to her friend. "This is for William," she said quietly. "If I cannot give it to him myself, someone must." The friend shook their head. "Diana, don't talk like that. You're safe. You have protection." And that's when Diana said the sentence that would haunt this friend forever. "No one protects you from the people you need protection from." With that, she took a deep breath and continued. She explained the evidence, the timelines, the discrepancies she discovered, the questions she had asked, the reactions she had received, the anger, the fear, the sudden tightening of security around her, the sudden restrictions on her movements. The sudden pressure from the palace to stay silent. But most terrifying of all, she revealed she had confronted Charles. And the way he reacted told her she was right. The friend didn't know what to say. What comfort can you offer someone who believes their life is at risk from the institution meant to support them? What reassurance can you give when the evidence on the table suggests she might be right? All the friend could do was listen. And Diana kept talking, quietly, urgently, emotionally, until she finally leaned back, exhausted, and said, "I don't know who to trust anymore." And that was the moment the friend realized this wasn't paranoia. This wasn't emotional instability. This wasn't exaggeration. This was a woman being hunted by her own truth. The friend promised to keep the envelope safe, promised to deliver it to William if anything happened, promised not to open it, promised not to speak of it. And for decades, they kept that promise, until William came knocking. But before we get to that meeting, before we reveal what Diana wrote inside, before we expose how the truth in that envelope led directly to the DNA test that made William collapse, we have to talk about one more thing. Because that night, Diana didn't just leave behind documents. She left behind a second object. Something small, something unassuming, something she tucked beneath the papers, something she called her insurance, something the palace never expected her to preserve. And that second object was the one thing that would change William's life forever. What if the truth that shattered Prince William's world wasn't whispered, hinted, or suggested, but delivered inside a single, silent envelope his mother prepared decades before her death? What if that envelope, creased, faded, sealed with trembling hands, and tucked away in absolute secrecy, became the one object capable of bringing a future king to his knees? This chapter isn't just about a document. It is about the moment William finally held Diana's fear in his hands. A fear she tried to outrun. A fear she encoded into letters, warnings, tapes, and cryptic whispers. A fear she buried for his protection. Because inside that envelope wasn't a story, an opinion, or a theory, it was evidence. Evidence she knew the palace would never willingly let him see. Evidence she believed they might kill her to keep hidden. And now, after decades of silence, that evidence was about to breathe again. It happened on an unusually quiet afternoon, the kind of day that feels ordinary on the surface but carries an unseen weight, the kind that precedes revelations. William had arranged the meeting discreetly, without advisors, without security hovering over his shoulder, without the typical royal complications. He needed privacy. He needed space. He needed the truth to meet him face to face, not filtered through aides or palace interpretations. The friend, Diana's trusted confidant, arrived without ceremony, their expression solemn, almost fearful. Because carrying that envelope for decades hadn't been an honor, it had been a burden. A secret heavy enough to poison sleep. A responsibility terrifying enough to haunt quiet moments. And now they were finally passing it on. William didn't speak at first. He simply gestured toward a small table, and the friend placed the envelope upon it with reverence. A soft thud. A sound that meant more to him than any royal proclamation ever had. He stared at it, not with curiosity, but with dread, because something inside him already knew this envelope was not going to deliver comfort. It was going to deliver truth. The kind of truth that scars. The kind that rewrites past, present, and future in a single breath. The friend broke the silence first. Their voice was steady, but their hands trembled. "She gave this to me," they said, "the night she feared she wouldn't survive. She said it was for you. Only you." William's chest tightened. He had spent his whole life wrestling with memories of Diana. With grief he learned to tuck behind royal composure, with unanswered questions he never dared to pursue. And now the answers were inches away. Answers that might validate every fear Diana ever expressed. He reached for the envelope, fingers brushing the aged paper. It was lighter than he expected, shockingly light, considering the weight of its significance. The kind of object you instinctively want to open with both hands and no witnesses. But before he could break the seal, the friend placed a hand gently over his. "Before you open it," they said quietly, "you need to know something else." She was terrified. She believed people inside the palace were watching her every move. And she believed this. They tapped the envelope. Was the reason. William swallowed hard. The room felt smaller, tighter. He wanted to ask what exactly they meant, But he could see in their eyes they didn't know the full story either. They only knew their part. They were a vessel, nothing more. Diana had fragmented the truth deliberately, spreading pieces across different people so that no single person, except William himself, would ever hold the full picture. He took a deep breath and slowly broke the seal. The paper tore softly, almost apologetically, as if aware it was opening old wounds. And when he slid out the contents, several folded documents, a handwritten note, and something small wrapped in tissue, his hands shook so badly he nearly dropped them. This wasn't just a letter. This wasn't just a warning. This was a map, a coded trail she had left behind. He unfolded the handwritten note first. Her handwriting, flowing, familiar, heartbreakingly alive, hit him like a punch to the chest. Diana had a way of writing emotionally even without trying. Her letters felt like her voice in ink. And now that voice was speaking directly to him from beyond death. "William, my darling boy," it began. "There are things you were never meant to learn from anyone but me. And there are truths the palace will never willingly tell you. If you are reading this, it means danger kept me from giving it to you myself. Danger. Not timing. Not circumstance. Not distance. Danger." William felt a coldness move through him, a heaviness he hadn't felt since he was a child attending his mother's funeral, trying to understand why the world had suddenly gone silent around him. He continued reading. Diana's note grew darker, more urgent. "There are questions I began to ask, questions about your father, about your birth, about things I was never supposed to discover, questions that made people around me nervous. At first, I didn't understand why, but then I found answers. And once I found them, everything made sense. The shifts in tone, the surveillance, the coldness, the silences, the pressure, the fear." William's pulse hammered in his ears. His vision blurred slightly. This wasn't about emotional pain. This wasn't about divorce. This wasn't about scandal. This was about something deeper, something biological. The note continued. "I've enclosed copies of documents I found. You must protect them. You must verify them. And when the time is right, you must seek scientific confirmation. Do not trust anyone inside the palace with this. Not physicians, not advisors, not family. Only someone outside their reach." William froze. That was exactly what he'd done. The DNA test, the secrecy, the pseudonym. It was all written into her instructions decades before he ever considered doing it. "Remember what I told you once," the letter said in its final line. "Be strong when the truth comes." His breath caught. That sentence, that whisper, that childhood memory he could never shake. She had written it here, almost as if she knew he would need the reminder. He placed the letter down carefully. His hands were trembling so violently he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. The friend watched silently, tears forming in their eyes, understanding they were witnessing the unraveling of a man, not a prince. Then William opened the documents. Medical records, notes, copies of hospital correspondences, genetic annotations Diana had gotten hold of. There were references to timelines that didn't match official narratives. Notes that raised questions about biological relationships. Letters Diana had written to a private doctor asking for explanations about things that didn't add up. And at the bottom, medical data that linked directly to a test only William himself could take. A test that would later confirm everything. But the most chilling piece wasn't the papers. It was the small object wrapped in tissue paper. William unwrapped it slowly, almost afraid of what it might reveal. Inside was a tiny plastic vial. Empty, but labeled. And the label held a name he never expected to see connected to himself. A name that made him choke on his breath. A name that shattered the foundation of everything he had believed about his own lineage. A name that explained Diana's fear, Charles's anger, the palace's silence, and the urgency behind her warnings. His heart pounded as he stared at that name, because it implied something that would shake the monarchy to its core. And Diana had known. But the real shock? This vial wasn't the only sample she preserved. There was another one, somewhere else, hidden, and the only person who knew where it was the same friend standing in front of him. What if the truth Diana left behind wasn't just hidden in envelopes, documents, or whispered warnings, but torn out of her own letters, ripped from her journals, quietly removed from her correspondence by hands determined to erase the most dangerous parts? What if the puzzle William was trying to piece together wasn't a clean narrative, but one full of missing fragments, deliberately missing fragments. And what if the missing pages themselves told a story more terrifying than the pages that survived? Because Chapter 6 is where William discovers that the evidence his mother tried to preserve had been targeted long before he ever saw it. Someone inside the machinery of the monarchy didn't just want Diana silenced. They wanted her truth dismantled, piece by piece, page by page, thought by thought, until nothing remained except the narratives approved by the crown. The friend, the lone keeper of the envelope, was still standing in front of William when he finally processed the name on the vial. His breath was shallow, his pulse racing, his hands trembling so violently the documents shook in his grip. But before he could ask the 1,000 questions spiraling through his mind, the friend gently placed another object on the table. A thin, almost weightless folder, worn at the edges, slightly discolored, and strangely empty-looking. This, the friend said softly, wasn't meant to be empty. William stared at it, confused. He opened the folder and found only a few sheets inside, surrounded by dozens of jagged impressions, faint outlines of where pages had once been but were now missing. Ripped out, torn, removed cleanly, violently, surgically. And the missing pages? They weren't random. The friend explained that Diana had given them a set of personal letters, handwritten pages she wanted kept safe. But over the years, as the friend moved homes, as life changed, as risks increased, someone broke into a storage unit where those letters had once been kept. Only one item was disturbed. Only one folder was tampered with. Diana's letters. When the friend found them, half the pages were gone. Not misplaced. Not scattered. Removed. Someone had gone through the envelope, extracted the most important contents, and left the rest behind like a warning. We know where to look. We know what she left behind. We know what you're hiding. William felt his throat tighten. The idea that someone had tampered with Diana's private letters, letters meant for him, was horrifying enough. But the idea that they had been stolen long before he ever received them meant something far darker. Someone knew Diana left behind proof. Someone knew she was gathering information. Someone knew she had confided in a friend. And someone made sure to destroy as much of her truth as possible. The friend swallowed hard. I kept them locked away, they said. I thought it was safe. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't show anyone. But after Diana died, someone was watching. Someone was tracking her contacts. And someone found out I had something of hers. William clenched his jaw. He wanted to be sick. He wanted to scream. He wanted to demand answers from ghosts. But instead, he forced himself to look at the remaining pages, every word heavy with meaning. These weren't ordinary letters. They were confessions, observations, detailed descriptions of things that frightened Diana, things she'd noticed, inconsistencies, medical anomalies, people acting out of character, strange comments made by doctors, medical results that didn't match expected timelines, letters referencing how she felt dismissed by the palace whenever she asked questions about her pregnancy with William, notes about how she was told not to worry when she clearly sensed something wasn't right. And then the page that froze William's blood. A handwritten paragraph where Diana wrote, "There is something wrong in William's medical file. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did. And when I asked about it, the reaction terrified me. They said it was an administrative mistake. But I've never believed that." William's heart pounded. He felt lightheaded. He rubbed his forehead, trying to steady himself. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't paranoia. This was a mother identifying discrepancies in her own child's birth records. Discrepancies someone tried desperately to hide. And then another line. "I've asked the same question 3 times, and each time I get a different answer." 3 questions. 3 different answers. 3 opportunities for the palace to quiet her concerns. And none of them worked. William flipped to the next surviving letter, dated just weeks before her death. "I don't think they want me to talk to anyone about this. They're tightening around me. I can feel it. Every time I mention William's name in connection with this subject, someone looks afraid. What are they afraid of? Why can't they just tell me the truth? I know enough now to see that something has been hidden. Something that affects William directly. Something to do with his blood." His blood. The same phrase from Chapter 4. The same phrase she whispered to her friend. The same phrase she always used when referring to the unspeakable. The letter continued. "If something happens to me, William must look for the missing pages. Because the missing pages are the truth they fear most." William stared at that line for a long time. The missing pages. The truth they fear most. Not the pages he held in his hand, but the ones stolen. The friend spoke quietly. Diana said those pages had the names, the details, the explanation, the evidence she couldn't risk keeping in her home. Names, people, positions, roles, motives, connections. Everything the monarchy would want erased. William ran a shaking hand through his hair. He felt the room closing in around him. Because if those missing pages contained what he suspected, then the monarchy had spent years hiding not only the truth, but the crumbs that led to it. But the surviving pages told him enough to infer what was missing. Over and over, Diana referenced anomalies, false information, hidden medical notes, and altered records. She named doctors William had never heard of. She referenced appointments that didn't match the official schedule.